She said she needed space, but the moment you stopped reaching out, she started watching your stories. She ignored your texts, yet somehow she noticed every tiny change in your energy. And the most painful part, you kept trying harder while she kept drifting farther, because nobody told you this brutal psychological truth. An avoidant woman often feels safest when she's the one moving away, but feels obsession the second she realizes you emotionally survived without her. That shift, that silent emotional reversal, it's the moment she finally starts missing you. Not because you manipulated her, but because for the first time, you stopped abandoning yourself to keep her comfortable. An avoidant woman rarely pulls away because you are not enough. That is the lie most people torture themselves with at 2 a.m. while replaying every conversation in their head. The real reason cuts much deeper than rejection. It lives inside emotional survival patterns built long before you ever entered her life. When connection starts becoming real, something inside her begins to panic. Not always visibly, not dramatically. Sometimes it happens in complete silence. One day she is warm, affectionate, emotional, oceanally present, and then suddenly she becomes distant, hard to read, emotionally unavailable. And the more genuine your feelings become, the stronger that invisible wall rises between you. That contradiction destroys people emotionally because it feels personal. It feels cruel. It feels confusing. You start thinking, if she cares about me, why does closeness make her disappear? Because closeness activates vulnerability, and vulnerability activates fear. An avoidant woman often learned very early in life that emotional dependence comes with pain, disappointment, pressure, criticism, or loss of freedom. So even when she deeply likes someone, part of her nervous system still treats intimacy like danger. That is why she can crave connection one moment and retreat from it the next. Her heart may want love, but her emotional conditioning fights against staying exposed for too long. And this is where most men unknowingly make everything worse. The moment she starts pulling away, they panic internally. They try harder, they text more, they explain more, they overlove, overpursue, over-sacrifice. They think consistency will prove safety. They think effort will finally break through here. Emotional walls. But to an avoidant nervous system, too much emotional pursuit can start feeling overwhelming instead of comforting. Imagine someone standing too close to you while demanding emotional certainty you are not ready to give. Even if they love you, your instinct is still to step backward just to breathe again. That is exactly what happens. The more intensely you chase reassurance, the more emotionally cornered she begins to feel. And once she feels emotionally cornered, her survival instincts take over. Suddenly she needs space. Suddenly she becomes cold. Suddenly conversations lose depth. Suddenly she acts emotionally numb while you are drowning in confusion, wondering what changed overnight. But what changed was not her feelings. What changed was the emotional pressure surrounding those feelings. That is the hidden truth almost nobody explains correctly. Avoidant women often do not disconnect because they feel nothing. They disconnect because they feel too much while lacking the emotional safety to stay inside those feelings comfortably. And when you finally understand this, your entire perspective changes. You stop seeing her withdrawal as proof of your inadequacy. Why? You begin recognizing it as emotional self-protection. Now, this does not mean you tolerate unhealthy behavior forever. It does not mean endlessly waiting while someone emotionally disappears whenever intimacy deepens. But it does mean understanding the psychology behind the push and pull dynamic, instead of destroying your own self-worth trying to decode it emotionally. Because here is the dangerous trap many people fall into. They become addicted to earning emotional closeness from avoidant partners. Every small moment of affection feels like relief after emotional starvation. Every tiny sign of warmth feels euphoric because it comes after distance. And slowly, without realizing it, they start abandoning themselves emotionally just to maintain connection. They stop speaking honestly about their needs. They suppress hurt to avoid pushing her away. They become hyper-aware of her moods. They walk on emotional eggshells. They sacrifice inner peace just to keep emotional access alive. And eventually they wake up exhausted, anxious, emotionally drained, wondering why loving someone feels like psychological warfare. Because somewhere along the way, they confused emotional instability with emotional depth. Real love does not require you to constantly betray yourself to keep another person comfortable. And ironically, the moment you stop over-functioning emotionally is often the moment the entire dynamic shifts. When your energy becomes calmer, steadier, less desperate for emotional validation, something unexpected begins happening inside her mind. The emotional pressure disappears. Now she no longer feels chased, no longer feels emotionally cornered, no longer feels responsible for stabilizing your emotions. And in that emotional space, she can finally start feeling your absence naturally, instead of think about you without feeling consumed by expectations. She can miss you without simultaneously feeling trapped by you. She can emotionally process your value in silence instead of constantly defending herself against emotional intensity. And here is the painful irony. Many avoidant women only fully feel the emotional impact of someone after distance creates room for reflection, not because they are heartless, but because suppression delays emotional processing. While you are expressing emotions immediately, she may still be unconsciously numbing hers in real time. And only after space exists does the emotional reality begin catching up internally. That is why so many people become shocked when an avoidant partner suddenly reappears emotionally after weeks or months of distance. The emotions did not magically appear overnight. They were delayed beneath layers of emotional defense mechanisms. But by then, something else has hopefully changed too. You. Because the greatest transformation is not learning how to make her stay. It is learning how to stop abandoning yourself every time someone becomes emotionally unavailable. The moment you reclaim your emotional center, your entire energy changes. Your worth stops depending on whether someone texts back. Your peace stops depending on someone else's emotional inconsistency. And instead of obsessing over how to fix the relationship, you begin rebuilding your own identity again. That is when you stop radiating fear. And fear is what usually pushes avoidant people farther away. Not love, not care, not emotional depth. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear-driven pursuit. But grounded emotional confidence, that creates space for attraction to breathe again. Because deep down, avoidant women are not searching for someone who can emotionally suffocate them with love. They are searching for someone emotionally strong enough to love deeply without collapsing into dependency. And the moment your energy communicates that level of emotional stability, you stop becoming pressure. You become unforgettable. Most people believe love is proven through reaction, reacting quickly, reacting emotionally, reacting intensely. So when an avoidant woman becomes distant, the immediate instinct is to respond with urgency. You want answers. You want reassurance. You want emotional clarity because the silence feels unbearable. And the more uncertain things become, the louder your emotions start screaming for control. That is where everything begins falling apart. Because emotional reactivity may feel natural, but to an avoidant nervous system, it often feels overwhelming. The moment you start spiraling emotionally, she feels the pressure instantly, not always consciously. Sometimes she cannot even explain why she suddenly feels exhausted or disconnected around you. She just knows something inside her wants distance again. And the tragic part is this. Most of the emotional behaviors people use to save the connection are actually the exact things pushing the avoidant person farther away. Long emotional paragraphs, constant checking in, needing reassurance every few hours, analyzing every mood shift, demanding emotional certainty during moments of withdrawal. All of it communicates emotional dependency. Now, understand something carefully. Wanting reassurance is human. Wanting emotional consistency is normal. But when your emotional state becomes completely controlled by her responses, your energy changes in a way she can feel immediately. You stop feeling grounded. You stop feeling emotionally safe. You stop feeling centered in yourself. And avoidant personalities subconsciously pull away from emotional chaos, even when they care deeply about the person creating it. That is why emotional non-reactivity becomes one of the most powerful psychological shifts you can make. Not emotional numbness, not pretending not to care, not suppressing your feelings. Real composure. The kind where you can feel pain without letting pain control your behavior. Because most people react from fear, not from strength. Fear of losing her, fear of abandonment, fear that silence means replacement, fear that distance means the relationship is dying. So they chase harder trying to regain emotional certainty. But certainty forced through panic never feels safe. It feels heavy. And avoidant people are hypersensitive to emotional heaviness. That is why calm energy affects them so deeply. When she pulls away and instead of collapsing emotionally, you remain steady, something inside her becomes unsettled. Because now the emotional dynamic changes completely. She expected pursuit. She expected emotion. Al chasing. She expected panic. But instead, she feels your quiet emotional control. And suddenly, she cannot predict you anymore. That unpredictability creates psychological tension, not toxic mind games, not manipulation, just emotional self-respect. There is something incredibly powerful about a person who can experience emotional disappointment without emotionally exploding, because emotional explosions communicate instability, and instability weakens attraction. Think about how rare emotional control actually is today. Most people react instantly to discomfort. They post emotional pain publicly. They send impulsive texts. They seek immediate validation to escape uncertainty. Very few people know how to sit with emotional pain without letting it consume their identity. But when you master that skill, your entire presence changes. You stop operating from desperation, and desperation has an energy people feel before you even speak. Avoidant women especially detect it quickly because emotional dependency activates their fear of engulfment. The moment they sense someone emotionally clinging to them for stability, their instinct is to create distance again. But calmness creates curiosity. Because calmness signals strength, not fake alpha male performance, not emotional coldness, inner stability, the kind that says, I value this connection deeply, but I will not emotionally collapse every time uncertainty appears. That energy becomes magnetic because it feels rare. And here is what most people fail to realize. Silence becomes psychologically louder when it is not filled with emotional panic. The moment you stop reacting impulsively, she finally has space to emotionally process your absence without defensive resistance. Because when you constantly chase someone emotionally, their attention stays focused on escaping pressure. But when the pressure disappears, their attention shifts inward. Now they begin wondering, why is he so calm? Why does his energy feel different now? Why does his absence suddenly feel heavier? That internal curiosity is powerful because avoidant individuals often process emotions privately rather than externally. They may not immediately tell you they miss you. They may not suddenly become emotionally expressive overnight, but emotional reflection begins growing in silence. And silence becomes impossible to ignore when your emotional energy falls. GY is no longer chaotic. That is why emotional non-reactivity is not about punishment. It is about refusing to lose yourself emotionally every time someone withdraws. You maintain dignity. You maintain self-control. You maintain emotional direction. And ironically, that emotional steadiness often creates more attraction than emotional pursuit ever could. Because emotionally grounded people feel safe. Safe does not mean boring. Safe means stable. And stable energy calms the subconscious fear avoidant people constantly battle internally. The tragedy is that many people only discover this lesson after exhausting themselves emotionally trying to force intimacy from someone unavailable. They think loving harder will create closeness. But sometimes loving harder only increases emotional pressure. Real emotional power comes from restraint, the ability to pause instead of react, the ability to breathe instead of chase, the ability to remain centered while emotions scream for immediate relief. And make no mistake, this is difficult. Because when someone you love becomes distant, your nervous system wants certainty immediately. Your mind starts creating catastrophic stories. Every hour of length feels personal. Every delayed response feels threatening. Every shift in tone feels like emotional rejection. But reacting from wounded fear almost always deepens the disconnect. Not because your feelings are invalid, but because fear-driven behavior rarely creates emotional safety. Composure does. And once you embody that composure consistently, something fascinating happens. You stop obsessing over controlling her emotions. Instead, you start mastering your own. That is the real transformation. Because the strongest position you can ever stand in emotionally is not convincing someone to stay. It is knowing you will remain emotionally whole even if they leave. And that level of emotional independence changes how people experience your presence entirely. Suddenly, your attention feels valuable again. Your silence feels intentional instead of wounded. Your energy feels grounded instead of grasping. That is when avoidant women often begin feeling something they were previously resisting. The emotional weight of losing you. Words lose power when they are constantly available. That is one of the hardest truths people learn after loving an avoidant woman. You can explain your heart perfectly. You can send paragraphs filled with honesty, vulnerability, patience, and understanding. You can reassure her endlessly, and somehow, none of it seems to reach her the way you hoped. But then something strange happens. The moment you stop flooding the connection with emotional effort, your absence suddenly becomes louder than everything you ever said, and that silence begins haunting her in ways your words never could. Because avoidant people often process emotions differently than emotionally expressive individuals do. They are not always emotionally absent. Many times they are emotionally delayed. While you are feeling everything intensely in the moment, they are suppressing, compartmentalizing, distracting, or emotionally disconnecting to maintain inner control. So during the relationship itself, they may seem detached or emotionally hard to reach. But once space appears, once the emotional noise disappears, the reality of the connection often starts surfacing inside them. That is why absence becomes psychologically powerful, not because silence is manipulation, not because disappearing is some toxic strategy, but because distance removes emotional pressure and creates. There's room for reflection. When you are constantly present, constantly texting, constantly trying to maintain emotional closeness, her nervous system stays focused on managing pressure. Even if you are loving her sincerely, part of her mind remains in self-protection mode. But once your energy disappears, something changes. Now there is no pressure to resist, no emotional demand to escape, no constant reassurance flooding her nervous system. And in that quiet space, memories begin resurfacing naturally. The way you looked at her, the emotional safety you tried to provide, the consistency she silently depended on more than she admitted. Human beings often realize value most deeply through contrast, and absence creates contrast. Suddenly, your attention is no longer guaranteed. Your energy no longer surrounds her daily life. Your emotional presence no longer exists as background comfort. That vacuum becomes emotionally loud, especially to someone who unconsciously took your consistency for granted while struggling with closeness at the same time. And this is where many people sabotage the process. They become terrified of being forgotten, so they interrupt the silence constantly. A rando, calls, check-in, an emotional paragraph, a late-night message driven by loneliness. They think staying emotionally visible will prevent disconnection, but in reality, constant emotional availability often prevents reflection because there is no space to feel your absence fully. Avoidant individuals frequently need emotional distance before buried emotions begin rising to the surface. That is why some people appear emotionally numb during relationships yet suddenly emotional after separation. The emotions were always there. They were simply buried beneath defense mechanisms. And here is what hurts most. Many avoidant women do not fully understand the emotional importance of someone until that person emotionally detaches for real, not performatively, not manipulatively, genuinely. When your energy truly shifts away from chasing, when your focus returns to your own life, when your nervous system stops revolving around their emotional inconsistency, they feel the difference. Because energy changes before words do. Your silence feels different when it is rooted in emotional acceptance instead of hidden expectation. And that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Now her mind starts search. Ing for you in the spaces you once occupied emotionally. Your morning texts are gone. Your emotional reassurance disappears. Your availability fades. And humans notice emotional patterns most intensely after they stop receiving them. That is why absence can become emotionally overwhelming, especially when the connection carried genuine emotional depth beneath the surface. But understand this carefully. The goal is not making her suffer. The goal is reclaiming yourself emotionally. Because many people trapped in avoidant dynamics slowly lose their emotional identity trying to maintain closeness. Their entire mood becomes dependent on one person's attention. Their peace disappears. Their confidence collapses. Their emotional world narrows around waiting for affection that feels inconsistent and unpredictable. That is not love. That is emotional survival mode. And the moment you finally stop chasing external validation, your energy transforms completely. Now your absence carries emotional weight because it reflects self-respect instead of emotional dependency. There is something unforgettable about a person who loved deeply yet still found the strength to emotionally release what you could not control. That kind of silence feels different. It does not beg. It does not manipulate. It does not scream for attention. It simply moves forward with dignity. And dignity creates emotional impact. Because avoidant women are often accustomed to emotional pursuit. They expect people to keep chasing after distance appears. They expect emotional pressure to return eventually. But when someone quietly accepts reality and redirects their emotional energy toward growth instead of obsession, it disrupts the entire pattern. Now curiosity emerges. Did he move on? Why does his energy feel different now? Why do I suddenly feel his absence everywhere? And curiosity is powerful because it opens emotional doors avoidance once kept shut. Silence also forces emotional accountability. As long as you are constantly present trying to repair everything, she never has to fully confront the emotional consequences of withdrawal. Your emotional effort keeps cushioning the impact. But when your energy genuinely leaves, the emotional reality becomes visible. Now she must sit alone with the connection instead of constantly reacting against it. And many avoidant people experience delayed grief because AWS emotional suppression postpones emotional processing. At first they feel relief from distance, then silence deepens. Then memories begin resurfacing unexpectedly, and suddenly the emotional weight arrives all at once. The tragedy is that by this point, the person they pushed away has often changed internally, because healing creates transformation. The man who once begged for reassurance begins rebuilding himself emotionally. He starts sleeping peacefully again, starts reconnecting with purpose, starts remembering who he was before emotional inconsistency consumed his mind. And ironically, that emotional evolution is what often makes him most attractive again, not because he became colder, but because he stopped abandoning himself emotionally. That is why genuine absence becomes so powerful psychologically, not because it punishes the avoidant woman, but because it forces both people to confront truth without emotional noise distracting them. And truth becomes impossible to avoid in silence. The truth about who cared, the truth about emotional patterns, the truth about what was lost, the truth about what was taken for granted, because sometimes the loudest thing a person can say, I, is nothing at all. One of the biggest mistakes people make after losing an avoidant woman is turning the entire experience into a mission to win her back. Every thought becomes about her. Every decision becomes about her. Every improvement secretly becomes performance designed to regain her attention. You start going to the gym hoping she notices, posting differently hoping she reacts, working harder hoping success makes her regret leaving. And without realizing it, your entire identity remains emotionally chained to someone emotionally unavailable. That is why healing feels impossible, because even your growth is still orbiting around the relationship. The painful truth is this: you cannot become emotionally powerful while secretly begging to be chosen. And avoidant women feel that energy immediately, even when you say nothing, because energy reveals attachment before words ever do. You may act calm externally, but internally your entire nervous system is still waiting for validation from her, still hoping for a message, still imagining reconciliation every night before sleep, still emotionally trapped inside the need to prove your worth. That emotional dependency changes you, your presence completely. It creates tension, neediness, emotional heaviness, and heavy emotional energy suffocates attraction, especially for avoidant personalities who are hypersensitive to feeling emotionally responsible for another person's stability. That is why the biggest shift happens the moment you stop making her the center of your emotional universe. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally remembered yourself again. You remember your ambition, your purpose, your standards, your future. You stop waking up every morning emotionally checking whether she still wants you. You stop measuring your worth through inconsistent affection. You stop living inside emotional survival mode, and suddenly your life starts expanding again. That shift is magnetic, because people can feel when someone is emotionally rooted in themselves instead of emotionally clinging for validation. And ironically, this is often when avoidant women begin emotionally noticing you again. Not when you chased hardest, not when you begged most emotionally, not when you over-explained your love endlessly, but when your energy finally became self-contained. There is something psychologically unsettling, about realizing the person who once emotionally revolved around you no longer does. Especially for avoidant individuals who unconsciously relied on your emotional consistency while simultaneously resisting intimacy. Now, the emotional dynamic changes. Before, she knew your attention was always available. She knew your emotional focus remained locked onto her no matter how distant she became. But now, your energy feels different, more focused, more grounded, more unavailable emotionally, and that creates emotional tension because certainty disappears. Humans naturally value what feels emotionally scarce, not fake scarcity created through manipulation. Real emotional independence, the kind born from rebuilding your life after heartbreak instead of remaining emotionally frozen inside it. That transformation affects everything. Your conversations feel different. Your silence feels different. Your presence feels different. Because now you are no longer speaking from emotional desperation. You are speaking from self-respect. And self-respect creates attraction far more powerfully than emotional chasing ever could. The tragedy is that many people spend months trying to convince avoidant partners of their value instead of building lives that naturally reflect it. They think attraction comes from persuasion. It does not. Attraction grows strongest when someone feels emotionally whole within themselves. That is why purpose becomes so important after heartbreak. Purpose redirects emotional energy away from obsession and back toward creation. Instead of staring at your phone waiting for emotional breadcrumbs, you begin rebuilding your mind, body, goals, discipline, and identity. You become occupied by growth instead of consumed by emotional uncertainty, and growth changes your emotional frequency completely. Now you are no longer operating from fear of loss. You are operating from vision. That difference is enormous psychologically. Fear contracts energy. Purpose expands it. Fear makes you emotionally cling. Purpose makes you emotionally grounded. And grounded people create emotional safety because they are not constantly seeking rescue from others. That safety becomes deeply attractive to avoidant women because it removes subconscious pressure. Now you are not demanding emotional regulation from her, not demanding constant reassurance, not making her responsible for your self-worth. You become emotionally self-sustaining, and emotionally self-sustaining people feel powerful without trying to dominate anyone. There is also another hidden psychological truth here. When you stop obsessing over getting her back, your perception becomes clearer. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop excusing emotional unavailability endlessly. You stop interpreting crumbs as commitment. And for the first time, you begin asking healthier questions. Does this relationship actually bring peace into my life? Am I constantly anxious around this person? Have I been sacrificing myself emotionally just to keep connection alive? Those questions are transformative because they shift your focus from how do I keep her to is this dynamic healthy for me? That is emotional maturity, and emotional maturity creates strength, not loud, performative strength, quiet strength, the kind that can love deeply without losing boundaries, the kind that can feel heartbreak without collapsing spiritually, the kind that knows attachment should never cost self-respect. Ironically, avoidant women often become most emotionally affected when they realize the person they once pulled away has genuinely evolved beyond emotional dependence, not bitter, not angry, not revenge-driven, just transformed. Now your energy communicates. I wanted the connection deeply, but my life does not stop because someone struggles to receive love consistently. That realization can hit avoidant individuals harder than emotional pursuit ever could, because suddenly they are no longer managing someone emotionally chasing them. Now they are confronting the possibility of genuinely losing someone emotionally valuable. And humans often recognize emotional value most painfully when access begins disappearing. That is why becoming obsessed with winning her back weakens you psychologically. It keeps your identity trapped in external validation. But rebuilding yourself, that changes your entire emotional reality. Now, whether she returns or not, you are no longer broken without her attention. And that emotional independence creates a presence impossible to fake. Because the strongest energy in the world is not desperation trying to be chosen. It is someone who finally realizes they were already enough before the rejection ever happened.